Hello, everyone. Welcome to ACP 2022. I'm Dr. Mani Mehari, and today I'm going to talk about investigating the influence of movie genre on mood using non-parametric methods. Movie as a stimulus was used in many studies to evaluate the effects on mood. In this study, I have used 3 genres of movies to evaluate that. There are several models to describe and analyze mood. When it comes to quantitative dimensional structure ones, we can trace it back to these 3 categories. The first one, pleasure and arousal. These 2 components were claimed to be almost independent. You could see also in another study, they used a 3rd dimension. And in some studies, they partition each one of these 2 components to describe mood in details. In this study, I use pleasure and arousal as the main component of mood to describe it. And also I consider pleasure and arousal as 2 independent components of mood. I've collected data from 30 volunteers. I know these volunteers personally. That's why you can see that the number of volunteers are not big enough to, for example, use central limit theorem in order to use standard normal distribution to have significant results when it comes to data analysis. But I have sacrificed this because I wanted to obtain accurate data from the beginning. Now, when I use that, for example, let's say these individuals, they try to take a personality test. So I could help them to do that. I would validate their results. So the results that I found, I'm sure that they are very accurate. That's why I had to use non-parametric methods in order to deal with that. So that's the sacrifice that I made. In the future studies, hopefully it's possible to increase the number of data so that we can even get more significant results from them. And in this data, you can see that almost half of them are female. And the age range is from 21 to 40 years old. The questionnaire contains 2 parts. The first part is related to Big 5 personality trait tests. I use Goldberg test to do that. And the possible values for each one of these traits are from 0 to 1, to 0 to 100. So you will see it also in an example that I will show you that what are the possible values for it. And for measuring the core effect of participants, as I said, I use these 2 almost independent components of mood. And I measured them after watching random movies for an hour. And these random movies, I show the participants in separate days. And each individual watched for sure 1 horror, 1 comedy, and 1 romance movies. And I tried to see what would be the difference after watching the movie in terms of pleasure and arousal in their mood. So let me go through more details related to such quantitative methods. Like, for example, here for pleasure and arousal, you could see that they could get values from -5 to 5, either for pleasure or arousal. In this study, I've chosen the difference. So it means that either it could be increased in a positive way or decreased in a negative way. And I will show you in one example that what I mean by that. But let's say if we want to show the intensity of each one of these components, then the combination of that can show that, for example, when we talk about depressive mood, where this one is located. when we talk about manic trait, where this is located. For example, for anxiety, you can see that pleasure is too low and arousal is too high. And PL stands for pleasant laziness. In one proposal, I mentioned about pleasant laziness as a mood disorder. Clinical psychologists suggest that it's better to use a term trait for that, like manic trait, because in order to consider it as mood disorder, they prefer that the pleasure should be too low. When someone has high pleasure as the mood, then they don't consider it usually as uh, as a disorder. But the thing is that, for example, for manic trait, we can see that the mood swings usually for those who are suffering from bipolar disorders, then from manic trait, they can move to depressive mood and come back, and it happens a lot. And when they stay, for example, in manic trait, maybe for some type of bipolar, it can be longer or less. But anyway, I don't want to talk about it that much in details here. But let's say, for example, for pleasant laziness, that could happen also, such mood swings with anxiety, for example. So that's why this part of this picture is also very important, that pleasure is so high and arousal is too low. And that one keeping in mind, because when I talk about the results and conclusions, I will talk about it later as well. So you can see after data collection, I summarized data. There are 30 individuals, as I mentioned, but here as a sample, I showed 5 of them. Like, as I said, for personality traits, they could be a value between 0 to 100. And here, for example, HCR, they are related to horror, comedy, and romance genre of movies. And P stands for pleasure and A for arousal. So either it could be -1, it means that after watching the scary movie, the pleasure decreased for this individual. For this individual, no change. And for this individual, for example, the pleasure increased. So that's how I come up with these data. Now, by using Spearman correlation as non-parametric correlations, because I mentioned that the number of data as the sample was not big enough to consider standard normal distribution and the corresponding tests I could use for that. So I used non-parametric methods. So I've come up with these results, like a positive relation for watching romance movie was detected between C personality trait and pleasure mood component. And for each one of them, you can see I have provided also the confidence level, and here as per p-value. So moreover, for example, I found 2 negative relations for watching romance movies, like C personality trait and arousal mood component, and O personality trait and arousal mood component. They showed negative relations. And as you can see, I mentioned only about the significant ones here. In addition, I found 2 internal negative relations. By internal, I mean, for example, for personality traits here, and also separately for pleasure and arousal. So extroversion and neuroticism, with this p-value, I found that they are negatively related. And also for pleasure and arousal mood components, I understood that for watching romance movie, we could see that there is a negative relation between them. The other summarization of the data was related to relative frequency of mood components based on movie genre. So as I said, I observed that inside this table that whether a specific component of mood was increased or decreased. And based on that, I constructed a relative frequency table. And for example, for a scary movie, you could see, for example, for 60%, they actually experienced lower pleasure after watching it. And in this table, I showed the maximum relative frequency. That's why I didn't show the value here. Also didn't show value for no change. So as you can see the values here, they are related to relative frequency of the maximum for each category. So for pleasure and a scary movie, for arousal and horror, again, for each one of them, just one value. Now compare all of these values and also using non-parametric sign hypothesis test. I found out that these two results that we found, they are significant. And the significant, the p-value for that was 1/1000. So what I found from that result was horror genre of movies can increase arousal mood components, and also comedy genre of movies can increase pleasure mood components. So that's what the result showed me. So as conclusion, a positive relation between pleasure mood component after watching a romance movie with C personality trait was detected. This result suggests that those who have high C personality trait can increase their pleasure mood dimension by watching a romance movie. And also I gave some suggestions after each one of these conclusions, like those with high C personality trait can use this self-regulation method to avoid depression or anxiety. But how did I come up with that? By looking at this graph. You see, by looking at it and describe it quantitatively, then it is possible to give some suggestions. And of course, clinical psychologists at the end should validate each one of them in practice. So as you can see, all of them are now in theory here because there are quantitative methods after all. So another conclusion, a significant negative relation was found between O and C personality traits and arousal mood dimension after watching a romance movie. This result suggests that those with low level of O and C personality traits can increase their arousal mood dimension by watching a romance movie. This method can be used as a self-regulation method to avoid depression and pleasant laziness. So pleasant laziness, I already mentioned that in that graph, and you can see for both of them arousal is too low, and that's why this method can be used for that, to increase the arousal. And a meaningful negative relation was observed in the results between pleasure and arousal mood components after watching a romance movie. These results suggest that regardless of someone's personality trait and movie preferences, watching romance movies can increase the mood swings, and individuals with bipolar mood disorder should avoid watching this genre of movie. And again, we could say it for pleasant laziness, in case we will find out that these mood swings can happen for those who are suffering from anxiety and PL, pleasant laziness, at the same time. So for the second part of the conclusion, we could say that watching horror movies can significantly increase arousal mood component. Therefore, people who suffer from anxiety and manic trait should avoid watching horror movies. So assume that such conclusions will be used in applications to, for example, give suggestions for watching movies to individuals. So by just getting the personality traits of those individuals and getting to know their mood swings and also pleasure and arousal measurements, so we could give them much better suggestions, not just because they like or dislike that movie, because of their mental health. So such things could be very important for that. And another conclusion, watching comedy movies can significantly increase pleasure mood component. Thus, watching this genre of movies can be useful to avoid depression and anxiety, because the pleasure would be from negative could be positive by watching such genre of movies. In the future studies, of course, larger sample size can be used to find more significant results, and all of these results should be validated in practice by clinical psychologists. So those clinical psychologists who are interested to validate that, please don't hesitate to contact with me, because that would be lovely to see it also in practice, that how significant they are and how we can come up with new approaches as self-regulations, and also how to use psychotherapy instead of drug-based therapy in order to solve problems related to mood disorders. Thanks for your attention, and here's my contact if you are interested to collaborate for any collaboration or ask me any questions. And once again, thanks a lot for listening to this presentation. Bye for now.